One of the questions I had, I noticed in your chart of provisions was the CPIE. And doesn't that actually argue against the other arguments we've heard this morning that, you know, that would actually lower the cost of living allowance each year?
The chain
That would-
CPI.
Yes,
yeah.
that would put even more pressure on low-income people, wouldn't it, if there was a lower COLA each year? I mean, doesn't that kind of argue against the whole argument of that we need to increase and strengthen Social Security rather, in some ways that weakens the protection for low-income people if you have a CPIE?
Yeah, the CPIE, which is the Consumer Price Index for the elderly,
Yes.
actually goes up somewhat faster than the one that's now used for the program.
Mhm.
And there's a chain CPI that
Yes,
the
the
BLS
change, yeah.
calculates that
Yeah.
that historically at least has gone up somewhat slower.
Yes.
And that, you're correct, that would lower, gradually lower the
I mean, it helps the
purchasing.
trust fund, but it
Exactly.
also hurts the people.
Exactly. No, I was putting up options that help bring income and outgo into balance.
Yeah.
You know, you can do it two ways.
Understand. Thank you.
Actually, I just wanted to sort of amplify a little bit the point that you made, Michael, about what happened at the beginning of the Social Security program. In 1935, when the Congress enacted the Social Security Act, the actuaries of the day made a very nice projection, and eventually it got focused on, and it showed that by 1980, there would be the inconceivably large sum of money of $47 billion that would accumulate in the Social Security trust funds under the projections that were made based on the original 1935 Act. And so, with haste, in 1939, the Social Security Act was quickly amended to accelerate and to make more generous the benefits that would be paid and to provide for the kind of family benefits that we have today. And one of the persons who was involved in this decision, Senator Arthur Vandenberg, when asked, well, why are you doing this? Wouldn't it be beneficial for the Social Security Fund to have an accumulation like it be invested in the economy? To which he responded by throwing up his hands, as the writer says, in mock horror, and saying, but that would be socialism. And it seems that when you project, say, a trust fund accumulation twice GDP, 1 3/4 of GDP, you sort of have that specter to overcome before you can get there, it seems.
Well,
Just like in 1930.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true, but you know, right now you can also invest globally. So I mean, you know, it would be a pretty big part of GDP in a sense. It would be as big as GDP, but it's not GDP. It's a very separate thing, and it's very passive. It's just sort of sitting there by itself and growing as the economies grow.
I think that's one of the strongest points in favor of ideas like yours, the fact that you could have global investments, the way many governments do with sovereign wealth funds and pension funds, because with the aging of the population in the OECD countries, the growth rates are going to be much higher in the developing world for generations to come, and you're not taking advantage of that. Yes, ma'am.
So my question's more related to the disability fund. There are a couple of things in the Social Security Act that actually prohibit or disincentivize people with disabilities from earning more money so that they may actually contribute more substantially to their own retirement. The substantial gainful activity limits and the asset limitations. Is there any discussion of those things perhaps being amended so that people could earn a living wage and keep some of their money so that they can invest it for their own retirement?
Yeah, the asset limits, I think, are in the Supplemental Security Income Program, which is not technically, it's a means-tested program that accompanies the Social Security program and is financed from general revenues, and that's kind of the program that we have that is targeted very much at low-income people, and it's not just low income, but limited assets as well. the Social Security or Social Insurance Program does have, the disability benefits are based on inability to work, and that's part of the definition of what is meant by disability. It doesn't mean necessarily, having an impairment. It means something that keeps you from working. So yes, it is part of the system that,
It's
You know,
sort of
if
a
you-
chicken and egg, though. I mean,
right, I mean, it's, for people who receive benefits, and we keep talking about ways to help people work who are currently receiving benefits, but it is also, the purposes of the benefit is for people who face career-ending disabilities before they can retire. It's, it's not easy.
It's not easy.
It's not easy.
Thank
Yes.
So with this idea of a two-tiered system, as some European countries have, what would happen, there's obviously more political support for government-mediated retirement security plans in Europe than there is here. Wouldn't there be a danger in the United States of the bottom level tier, flat and poverty level tier, turning into something more like SSI over time, being eroded, and then the upper level tier just being dismantled because people in the upper middle class or wealthy would say, well, I'd rather invest that on my own with my accountant, with my investment professionals, rather than put it channel it through the government, and then the whole system kind of unraveling.
No, that's a very good point in the American political context. My colleagues and I did a sort of a thought experiment, just like what would it look like if you simply went the opposite direction of most conversation, which is expanding private pre-funded savings, shrinking the public. And so we, as a thought experiment to change the debate, we had a two-tier system. In practice, I think you could get the same result without that danger by just keeping the existing Social Security benefit formula and tinkering with it and having two streams of revenue.
You have to eat the universal.
It would be universal, exactly, yes. But the payroll tax would not be, as Virginia and Dr. Hackinson pointed out, you can have interest income, you can have higher, taxes being recycled, which may be more important, particularly the affluent elderly who will grow along with the elderly population in general.
Yeah, they will continue to pay
Right.
somewhat more as the,
But wouldn't that be dependent on who's running the country, the politics of the country? Couldn't that second stream be taken away based on whether you're for or against Social Security? And maybe
Well, it could, but just speaking for myself, I'm more optimistic than I've been in very many years, because if you look at the Bush 40, the last Bush administration, there was this pressure to have partial privatization. That was so unpopular, even among Republican voters, it just died. It never even got to a vote. So then we had Simpson-Bowles, which was much, much more modest. It was a combination of cuts and tax increases, and that was a flop. You got the sequester out of it indirectly, but the Social Security proposals died because of their unpopularity. So I may be wrong, but there is a class divide on Social Security. Let's be clear about that. There have been studies of Larry Bartels and his colleagues that showed members of the 1%, Democrats and Republicans, want to cut everything except for education and infrastructure. Whereas most Republican voters who are not 1% want to expand Social Security and expand Medicare. So there is this, this electoral cycle has taught us the phrase donor class. And we're in a very interesting time in our politics where the wings of the parties are not regional the way they used to be in the past. It's the donors versus the voters. Any thoughts on the politics of this?
not a great deal, although even some of the 1% are strong supporters of Social Security. But you're right, it's.
Well, there are a few enlightened.
There's caution about increasing it, definitely. There seems to be a great deal of support for let's pay for what we have rather than shrink it. But, and that is a change in the conversation that, as you mentioned, is just beginning to happen. And in part that's because, for perhaps 30 years, we've had a mindset in Washington that to pay for what we want is just not a good thing to do. And that's why Social Security is such a challenge. It cannot borrow money. And the American people know that. They know they pay for it. And when given a choice to really think about, well, what do I want? Am I willing to pay a little bit more, or do I want to see less coming out? It's a great learning experience for thinking, an experiment for thinking about, okay, are we willing to start talking about paying for the level of government we want? Social Security isn't a bad place to start, because those are the rules of the game.
Yes, again.
I had a question for Virginia on disability. You know, everyone agrees that it would be great if people with disabilities could stay in the workforce as much as they're able to, and if that could be accommodated better. To what extent, but you know, SSDI, you can saddle SSDI with administrative costs and radically hike the administrative costs if you turn it into a program that tries to engage and get into every single workplace and ensure that they have the right arrangements to accommodate every single person with disabilities. It would drive up the administrative costs of the program substantially. So my question is, to what extent do you think efforts to help people stay in the workforce when they have a disability, to what extent is that SSDI policy, and to what extent is that are those policies that should be part of a disability policy of the federal government outside of SSDI?
I think that's a really, really good question and a very helpful thought, because certainly Social Security has one particular mission, which is to pay the benefits that are defined in the law. It's not right now set up to provide services to people, it doesn't employ social workers, it doesn't employ rehab professionals, it doesn't employ job search experts or job accommodation experts. The Labor Department has a significant role there. The Vocational Rehabilitation Agency has an important role there. And, you know, and plain old employment policies have an important role. So I think I would agree, and I think there's a growing awareness inside the government. I think that this is something that needs to be government-wide. It's not simply a social insurance problem. It's about employment policy and about service provision.
We have time for a few more questions, thoughts? Yes.
Professor, have you thought on the governance issue? It would strike me that the index fund could get very politicized. I mean, the current Congress might say no investment in Planned Parenthood funds. I'd support no investment in anything but green companies. And how do you prevent the politicization of the index fund over time?
Well, I think that if you have people professionally managing it, I think
a congressional writer saying, but no funds will be invested in Chinese companies this year.
Well, but you know, if the social security system is independent, you know, then these congressmen can't really influence anything, right? And it's specifics, yeah. But you know, the green issue, I think, will solve itself over time, and we're making progress. You know, some states in particular are driving the progress. So I don't think the independent Social Security Board is going to be influenced particularly by that. They're going to say, look, make these changes politically in other ways.
I urge you to think that one through. I think Congresswoman Wolsey could have some wonderful amendments that I would support. And
no money in defense. That hadn't even entered my mind, because I was thinking of it as more independent, but.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but look, the board can take up these issues. The independent board obviously can take up these issues and make decisions, yeah. I mean, because, you know, the public will put pressures on it too, but you know.
All I'm saying is that Congress could add a rider saying the board shall get no funding unless it withdraws all money from Chinese companies by the end of the year. And then you get this politicization of the economy in ways that some days I may like, other days I
Yeah,
may.
but presumably the funding is automatic through the payroll tax, right? I mean,
Well, this is a debate which will go on. We look forward to seeing all of you back here 80 years from now to see how much all this worked out. Please join me in thanking our panelists, Virginia Reno and Dr. Lewis Hopkins.